They are the Insiders. Darren Dreger, Pierre LeBrun, and Chris Johnston. Gentlemen, $7 billion. That's the figure Commissioner Gary Bettman mentioned on the second day of the Board of Governors meetings, talking about the potential revenue in the NHL this season. Now the question is, what are the ramifications of that? How specifically could that affect the salary cap? And Pierre, could we see the biggest single boost in the salary cap since COVID?
Yeah, it's possible, but it remains to be seen. And what happened on this day is that Gary Bettman and Bill Daly of the National Hockey League presented owners with two distinct scenarios. One is they stick with the current formula in the CBA as far as next year's salary cap, a 5% increase, which brings it from $88 million to $92.5 million. The other scenario, however, would be entering negotiations with the NHLPA to tweak the formula and bring in a phase-in element to a higher salary cap. And the concept for the phase-in is that the revenues are dramatically rising over the next few years, and what the league perhaps wants to avoid is a giant jump in the salary cap in 1 year only. So the phase-in makes sense, but it remains to be negotiated with the PA. I can tell you there are owners that were very intrigued by this conversation on this day, like Craig Leopold, the owner of the Minnesota Wild. I had a chance to catch up with him. Guess what? He's got a pretty big contract negotiation coming up this summer with MVP candidate Kirill Kaprizov. So it makes a difference whether the cap's at 96 or 97 or 98 million or whether it stays at 92.5. That's what's at play here. And let's face it, when we leave this meeting every year, usually we have a cap number locked in for next year. Yeah. That's not the case now. Owners have to leave this meeting knowing they have to be a little nimble.
And the owners know that the CBA talks are closer than they are further. The actual CBA right now, the current one, expires in September of 2026. So there is a lot of time. But today, for the first time, Gary Bettman threw out a date where maybe the serious negotiations can begin.
Yeah, it sounds like February, which, is a convenient time, of course. The NHL and the NHLPA will have a lot of time to be together. They're co-hosting the Four Nations face-off during that window. And, one thing Gary Bettman mentioned is, it doesn't have to be a formal start date, formal end, that there's ongoing dialogue. And they've, in the process of organizing that tournament, talking about the IOC and the IIHF about the 2026 Olympics, they're getting to some of the issues, I think, in a more informal basis. But this is such a unique experience. For those of us who have been around this league, normally, 21 months out from the end of the agreement, and everything just feels so positive. I mean, even Gary Bettman, the way he addressed reporters after the Board of Governors meeting, was careful not to say too much. Didn't want to presuppose anything. It was very deferential to the NHLPA. I think a great sign as they do formally look to get those talks underway.
Whenever the BOG comes together, there's always expansion talk, either in the room or in the halls. We saw a group here from Atlanta basically doing some early lobbying. Nothing official on that point. But, Dregs, could they be looking, the NHL looking to be expand well beyond North America?
No question about that. I mean, they're untapped markets, right? You think of China, you think of Europe, and when I say untapped, it's not necessarily from a competitive aspect, although you could see down the road an affiliate league, maybe with a team in Prague or in Sweden or in China, go down the list. It seems a bit strange because the National Hockey League probably doesn't want to create another competitive playing field for a player who maybe looks at the NHL differently than he might in his home country. We're talking about the finances here, right? And I think there's a fair comparison to what's going on with the NBA. The NBA has done a masterful job of maximizing merchandising dollars in other parts of the world, and the National Hockey League has failed in comparison. So there was an extensive presentation generated and based on what the National Hockey League can brainstorm to improve that sort of idea, the financing behind it, and the future of bigger dollars.
Another hot button issue seems to be the schedule, in particular handing out the Stanley Cup in late June. It seems like everybody across the board would like to see the cup handed out earlier, but that means what happens to the start of the season, the shifting schedule?
Yeah, it's a hot topic because it's ridiculous how far deep the season goes. There are a lot of people don't like it.
Really
I mean, there should not be a cup award on June 24th like we had last year. And we've reported on this before. The league and the NHLPA have had very, very preliminary discussion about what the world might look like with a different format to the schedule, which is this: shorten preseason, go to 84 regular season games per year, change some of the format, and yes, award the Stanley Cup earlier in June, which would let the league breathe a bit more in the off season. And perhaps, although I don't think it's a number one priority for the league, start earlier in October, although I think ESPN and TNT would have a word in that. The bottom line is, even though Commissioner Gary Bettman kind of downplay the significance of the possibility of that new schedule, it is still very much in play, and it's something the league intends to talk about with the NHLPA.
Right, but NHL general managers are likely asking, okay, are you adding days to the schedule? Because that's a big issue. It's an issue right now. It'll be a bigger issue because of the international events in play next season. The schedule makers will have to deal with 14 fewer days to work around that schedule as early as next season. We know GMs, coaches complain all the time. They don't have practice time. There's too much stress on the players, so the schedule is a bigger deal in all aspects.
And one other note of note is the Governors were shown some of the numbers from that face-off series, the behind-the-scenes show they did last year. Hit it out of the park. And so while no deal is formally done at this point, the expectation is there will be a second season this year.
And with that, it's a wrap of the NHL BOGs in Palm Beach, Florida. They are the Insiders, Darren Dreger, Pierre LeBrun, and Chris Johnston.